Hi, I'm Judy Noel. I am recording my mental and emotional state survey for CF290, Cultivating Mental Health, in spring of 2024 for Wesley Theological Seminary. Per the assignment, I interviewed actually four. The assignment said three. I asked four um, in preparation that one may not be able to or may not be willing to, but they all four were able and willing. So I interviewed all four. To give a little context for those interviewees. The first is a female, originally from Northern Ohio, but now living here in Kentucky. Female, prefers pronouns she, her. Early 40s. She is married, but no kids, and identifies as Christian. She's a pastor in the United Methodist Church, so very active in the life of the church. And um, from her point of view, has a very rich, like personal devotional life um, outside of, it's personal spiritual formation is really important for her. The second person I interviewed is a female, mid 30s, originally from Missouri, currently living in Indiana. She is prefers she, her, considers herself heterosexual, is married, mother of four. One of her children, who was born male, now identifies as transgender, identifies as female, prefers she, her pronouns. And they, as a family, do identify as Christian. The interviewee personally has a lot of trauma with the church. Her husband was formerly a pastor. And so not only is she carrying some trauma from childhood, but they actually have some trauma from during the time that he served full time in the church. So they are not currently active, but she does still have a, not only a personal relationship, but still, incorporate spiritual formation, devotional time, prayer into her personal life. The third person I interviewed is considers themselves non-binary, prefers they them pronouns. They are attracted to women, so by let me actually disclose that they are my cousin. They identify as Muslim. Originally born in Jordan, our family is Palestinian. They immigrated here about 8 years ago. Now lives in Western Kentucky and has for most of the time that they've lived here. According to our family, they see them as lesbian, and that within the Islamic faith, that's a big deal. While our family has tried to be accepting, that is definitely a point of tension for them. They're a sales manager for like a telecommunications, IT, and mid-20s, single, no kids. And then the fourth person that I interviewed, another female, actually, prefers she, her, early 40s, considers herself heterosexual, married, actually a pastor spouse. Their husband is, or her husband is in the United Methodist Church. They live in West Virginia. She is originally from Virginia, but they're serving in the West Virginia Conference. She works from home, doing communications work, actually for the West Virginia Conference of the United Methodist Church. They have two kids. Their oldest has an autism diagnosis. He is considered severe, nonverbal, requires a lot of care, hence why she works from home so that her schedule can be more flexible for him. And they also have a 4-year-old. They would be considered low income, although it's not that their income is necessarily low, but that the cost of care for their oldest son is so demanding that their living condition would be considered low income. I should also say that my second interviewee the kindergarten teacher in her mid-30s. Their family is also considered low income. So in the spirit of the assignment, I basically outlined 3 questions that I asked all 4 interviewees. And I'm going to go through each of those questions, talk about the responses of those that I interviewed, and then dive into Dr. Mate's The Myth of Normal and the social determinants of mental disease and how I feel like those are apparent in those that I interviewed for this assignment. The first question that I asked dealt around the pandemic. The question read, COVID-19 shut the world down. And over these past 4 years, in a lot of ways, we've seen a big shift in culture. How has that impacted you, your family, and your family's mental health? Do you feel more, less, or the same amount of stress? All 4 interviewees, in some form or fashion, actually, their initial response was very similar. To summarize, they basically said it was very difficult to re-engage publicly. That after being separated for so long, that they really struggled to obtain any sort of like normal interaction. That there was a lot of anxiety around interacting with other people. One interviewee mentioned that um, because everyone felt so differently about the pandemic, like some were a little more strict with um, protocol, the keeping the distance, wearing the mask. Have you been sick? Um, and then others were very lax, like didn't even want to wear a mask, were very anti-vaccine. That there was a lot of stress in how to interact, like what was going to be acceptable, what was going to be expected. Was there going to be tension because they disagreed with how they, with their opinions of the pandemic and how to respond? And then another interview, he said, you know, it, um, it, they are a little more introverted. And this was the third interviewee, my cousin. Um, they said that because they tend to be a little more introverted and not as prone to like face to face like social engagement, that they really found themselves, even though restrictions had been lightened some and they could go out and be interactive, that they really stayed inside, that they maintained digital connection, social media, emails, text messages, video chats, but found themselves less and less engaged on a face to face basis, or in a face to face setting with people, not really anything to do with the pandemic or with restrictions or with a fear of getting sick or what have you, but really just because they felt far more comfortable with digital interactions. So I thought that was really interesting. Um, so the fourth interviewee, who already had worked from home, said now that everyone was working from home, one of the things that she observed was that there was a lot, even for those, for especially specifically for the companies that maintained kind of a work from home environment, even after like a lot of folks were going back to in office in person, that those whose position stayed work from home felt very isolated. That for her, she was, used to working from home. That was, you know, uh, that was the ideal situation for their family. So even before the pandemic, she primarily worked from home. Um, for those who weren't used to it and were kind of looking forward to going back into the office but couldn't, it was very difficult for them to not feel isolated. And then the first interviewee, the female pastor in the UMC, she actually mentioned that it felt like the work-life balance became more difficult for her because um, there was so much that still needed to be done, visits, checking in with folks, that she struggled to like stop working because she was there was no separation. When she was going to church to work, when she was working from the office at church, or, able to go to the coffee shop to work on her sermon, that, when she left and wrapped up for the day and came home, then it's okay, I'm home. Now that the work was being done from home, it was harder to turn that off. And she found herself, feeling very anxious, it felt very stressful, that because there wasn't any separation, that she almost felt like, um, she couldn't go to bed until it was all done. Whereas when she was at church, she recognized, okay, my work for today is done, and these things can wait until tomorrow. That it almost felt like there was more pressure for her to get things done because, well, I'm working from home and I'm already here. I should be doing it. So I thought that was interesting because I feel like there were, just in my own personal experience, I felt like there were some folks who felt like working from home was actually more difficult because they had a hard time being motivated to work from home because they were home. They wanted to sit on the couch. They wanted to, hang out. Then my second question, was this. I actually shared a stat from Dr. Mate's book. Oh, probably should have wrote down the page number. I apologize. I'll find it and add that into the notes, for the video. But in the book, it says basically that 50% of population health is actually determined by social and economic environments. He actually mentions that, um, it's it's quite possible that that number in reality is higher. It's a conservative number. And so I shared that stat with those that I interviewed, and I asked them, "What's your first reaction to that?" Like me reading that out loud, that social determinants, the social categories that we find ourselves identified by, um, race, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education level, geographic location, part of town that you live in, those types of things. Knowing that those account for 50% of the overall health of a community, how does that make you feel? Um, and so, this question, out of the three that I asked, really sparked the most conversation. This was a space where I felt all four of them kind of dumped a lot of emotion out, which, was kind of powerful. So, to share, some of the comments that they made, one said, um, they felt very, overstimulated by, um, how accessible they were. And this was more of a kind of a work expectation, like from the perspective of their work culture as an employee, that they, felt like there was this requirement to respond. Um, and this was from the fourth interviewee, the female who works from home in communications, that now that everybody was working from home, um, it felt like the number of notifications, um, really increased. That, even now, after, things are, back to a new normal, that there was just constant notifications. That, now she's monitoring her her Microsoft Teams notifications, email, text messages, social media messages for the church, because she does manage communications for the conference and then assist other churches with their websites and social media platforms. That the increase in those, the increase in correspondence, and then the increased pressure to respond to those quickly, that because of her job and because she worked from home, it almost felt like there was a higher expectation for her, that, I mean, but this is what you do. You should be able to answer Johnny on the spot, when really the reason she works from home is so that her schedule can be more flexible. But she felt like her time was being it was in higher demand. Um, and this was the second interviewee, the kindergarten teacher, said that, not only for her, but for her children and the children that are in her school system, that she feels like, as far as, social determinants, um, or not social, I apologize, not social terms, the social environment and kind of the correlation for, um, our health, whether our physical or mental health. Um, that one of the things that she really, um, one of the things that seems to have the highest impact is just this like constant comparison. What should we look like? What should we be wearing? What brand names should our clothes be? How should our hair be fixed? So she works at a school that is in the west end of Louisville, which is predominantly Black. The school that she teaches at in her classroom, majority of her students identify as Black. And so she said that it's very apparent. Now, mind you, I probably should have mentioned that too. The kindergarten teacher identifies as Caucasian. Um, she said that it was very clear listening to, even, as kindergartners, as 5-year olds, the way that they would communicate to each other, that there was this expectation that like those whose skin was too dark, those who, wore their hair natural, and instead of having it processed in some way, that there was a stigma against that, that there was kind of this like negative response, even amongst others who also identify as Black, that there was kind of this like this grading scale, that if that they weren't trying hard enough to look white or to do things that um um kind of make their appearance more acceptable. There was also a mention that it seems like everyone is just really struggling with something, that 50%, that number of 50% did seem low to them, because and this was the non-binary um, person in their mid-20s, my cousin. They said that 50%, that they would guess it was more like 100%, that some people may just be better at hiding it than others, but that everyone seems to be struggling with something, that mental health is at what feels like an all-time low. um, but that they were also encouraged by the attention that mental health is getting, by the advocacy for having better accessibility to resources, and hotlines and phone numbers that you could call, making mental health accessible. That one of the things that COVID really did, excuse me, was increase like the occurrence of like telehealth appointments, like being able to have therapy appointments over the computer. And now so many providers are offering that, making it more accessible, making it easier, and kind of, taking this, maybe some of the fear away from some folks who, part of the struggle is just going to the office, being there in that space. What if someone sees me? What if I know someone in the office? There are fears associated with just, physically going out and being seen, that, having those options really, really was really an encouragement. And the last question that I asked, because I realize I'm running pretty close to time. I asked, how has your faith, your personal faith, had an influence on how you cope, or how has it not? And what other ways do you find yourselves coping? Everyone, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, they all basically said that they, utilize scripture, prayer, devotional material, meditation. There was also mention of, um, you know, taking a walk out in nature, reading a book that they want to read, journaling, exercise, making sure that they're physically taking care of their body, that they're eating well, the drinking enough water, that they're getting enough sleep, those types of things. But the most impactful answer for me, out of the four that I interviewed, was my cousin. They again are Muslim. Um, they do feel at times kind of shunned by the Muslim community because they identify as non-binary, because they are attracted to women, and physically they are a female, as far as appearance goes. So in the Muslim community, identifying as queer is just not acceptable for most. I'm not saying there aren't sections in the Islamic faith where folks are far more welcoming and affirming, but overwhelmingly so, it's looked down upon and considered a sin. Um, but while the other three that I interviewed all identify as Christian and in some way, shape, or form kind of associate the church, um, like the people, with their relationship with God in some way. It was very clear that for my cousin, their relationship with God was very much intact, regardless of how the Muslim community responded to them. So for them, they felt that their faith was by far their best coping mechanism, that they were able to find solace in scripture and in prayer, in the practices of Islam. They still pray 5 times a day. They still fast during Ramadan, and all of those things are not impacted in any way. They do still attend a Friday afternoon service on occasion. When her work schedule allows, she has found herself less involved in her mosque. However, they still feel very much connected and supported, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, even, by their faith. So after talking with all of these folks and hearing, there's a part of the reason that I picked all of them, although I probably should have picked a male interviewee in some form or fashion. I chose all of them specifically because there are multiple social determinants present, whether it's gender, race, social, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, all those things that I mentioned earlier, education level. Two of them have a master's degree. But the other two have bachelor's degrees. Two of them are considered low income. Two of them are considered like middle class. Um, one family is, impacted by their daughter identifying as queer. Another interviewee is a member of the queer community, identifying as non-binary. One married, heterosexual, but no kids. One married, heterosexual with kids, but one child has special needs and requires a lot of accommodations. And so I really wanted to get a feel for how those social determinants and their kind of their crossroads really impact. And I think what we see, or at least just from my observations, is we see a lot of that generational trauma. We see a lot. I heard a lot of mention of, things like the impact of their family, the way that they would process stress. A couple of them made jokes about like, yeah, but that's how it is in our family. You just don't talk about it, even if it did hurt your feelings. And so I think there are a lot of impacts, especially for my cousin. Um, the family knows that they identify as queer. They know that they identify as non-binary. They know that they prefer they them for pronouns, but the family still calls her, or calls them her. And in full fairness or in full transparency here, I do it on accident. Their preference for they them has been fairly recent, just in the last few years, and so sometimes I do slip and say her or she, but especially if they're with me in that conversation, the first thing I do is apologize. Our family doesn't. They don't acknowledge it. They don't talk about it, because if they don't talk about it, it's not a problem. And so while that has some to do with culture, and while our family does still try to love them and include them in family things, it's very apparent that because identifying as queer in any way is is shameful or sinful for Islam, that there is a lot of emotional suppression that comes with that identity for them. I know for the fourth interviewee whose son is, has been, diagnosed with autism, falls on the spectrum and considered severe, that there's a lot of societal trauma. Though, the inability to go certain places, to do certain things, even within the church, place that should be welcoming and loving. And, we talk about, come as you are, everyone's welcome. um there's just kind of a fine print to that says, as long as we don't have to do much to change or make accommodations for you. And so her family, while even though her husband is a pastor, they don't actually attend church with him anymore, because the church that they're currently serving at is not conducive to a safe environment for their oldest son. They won't allow any covers over the lights to make it less stimulating, as far as like sensory issues is concerned, sensory sensitivity. They have made several hurtful comments about him wearing headphones. They've made several hurtful comments about his outburst. They've even had people say that they're scared of him, which is he's not aggressive in any way. So there are things about kind of those social determinants that directly relates to the stress that they feel, the anxiety they feel, where they feel it. Especially, I think, in what's very telling is the spaces they feel the safest. For the fourth interviewee, her son with autism, the place they feel the safest is home. Yes, she is more introverted, but she still likes to go out and do things. But because it's so stressful and anxiety driving, not just for her son who's autistic, but for her, their family doesn't go out to places. They don't go and do things. They spend almost all of their time at home. All of their vacations are to other family members, and even those family members, it's only a select few, because not even all of their family is accepting and accommodating for what Noah needs to make a space feel safe for him. So I think it is very apparent that there are a lot of things about those social determinants, as identified in Dr. Mate's book, that really lead to the spaces where people feel stress, the spaces where they feel anxiety, the pressures to look a certain way, to talk a certain way, to say certain things, wear certain clothes, the way that we behave, and then the level of stress that they feel in their life. Like from my cousin, they seem to carry the most stress in their voice as we talked. But she also, or sorry, see, I did it just there. Sorry, cousin. There, um, they have the most kind of social determinants out of the four people that I interviewed. For the second and fourth interviewee, who they directly don't have, like the second interview, they don't identify, she doesn't identify as queer, but their daughter does. For the fourth interviewee, they don't have special needs, but their son does. Even having that kind of secondary determinant that's not theirs directly, but it's something that they're responsible for. It's their child, it's in their care. There was also a different kind of dynamic. It's almost like a double whammy, that they're not only absorbing, the impact for their child, but also the impact that it has on them. And so I think it's very clear that, what Dr. Mate talks about in the myth of normal, those social determinants and how they lead us to mental disease is very, very apparent. So thank you. I know I've kind of went over my time, but hopefully this has been an enjoyable conversation for you, like it has been for me.